I had mentioned before the acquiring of powers. That's important for anyone who's serious in their endeavors to make powerful spells, prayers, rituals, things that really are impactful. It's important, I think, to understand all of this so that everyone is able to be successful. First thing is, there's a basic way to do things. And I'm going to make this probably a multi-series video here. But there's a basic way to do things here. The first one that's probably the easiest and most recognizable is the fact that when you enter into worship with your God, there is an inevitable connection and power created. That's really important to understand. The connection that you get between you and your idol and your God is able to produce for you powers. Now, these powers typically are used in two ways. The first way is that it's released around the area that the idol was worshipped at, or the particular god themselves can utilize that power to bless your life in ways that they feel fit. That's probably the easiest because it's something everybody's doing pretty much now anyways. All right, but then there's some more advanced, more esoteric aspects to this. There's also the ability to trap the powers, to contain them, and maybe is a better way to say it, and store them so that you yourself can utilize those powers. And the reason why this actually works is because powers are inevitably created. Let's say there's a worship ceremony going on and your powers are created between you and your idol. And the Father God was able to barter a deal so that other gods could utilize that power to bless your life, in particularly the idol that was being worshipped before. Okay? But because that rule was created, it also allows for us to utilize those powers. And in those scenarios, in this scenario, the powers can now be contained and then can be used to amplify whatever we are doing. Now, there's a multitude of ways that this can be done. So I'm going to give you some brief ideas. Some of the ones that are a little bit more famous now are the idea of trapping powers in stones. That's another one. In the old days, there was pottery traps. There's just a multitude of ways that this can be done. The actual vessel only matters in itself in regards to its value, because the goddess of luck, when something is valuable, in her eyes, she can impart some of her power onto it. So, and it doesn't have to be, I say, monetarily valuable. It could be something precious to you. I mean, it could be something as small as a note from your child or from a friend, and those items are precious to you, and it can be used as a container. And sometimes that container can be more valuable to the goddess of luck than, let's say, a gold ring that really has no meaning to you just because it's valuable to others in its monetary sense. Now, yes, silvers and golds are monetarily valuable, so yes, she respects that more, and that's how she works. But the key here is when it comes to traps, when they are monetarily valuable, or valuable in general, they can hold more power and amplify the power itself that's in it. So my recommendation when you start off trying to acquire powers and containing powers, you keep in mind that you might want to consider a valuable item to you. Now let's talk about how you would achieve containing powers. One of the first ways this can be done is, let's just use an example Let's see what I have on me. Here, this is just a little piece of technology. Let's imagine this is a stone, okay? And I were to cast a spell on it to turn it into a container for powers. Now let's imagine this was passed down in my family for hundreds of years. It's a really valuable item. It's a family heirloom. It's got meaning, importance, and it's had other people, let's assume they were also doing something similar to this with it. It had other people doing magic with it. And so it becomes powerful in that sense, and it's even more so powerful to luck. So now it can contain power. So now let's say I was in a worship ceremony and I had set this guy up to trap that power. It would be as simple as long as it's in the room with me, whatever happened between that worship and me and that idol and that relationship that I was developing with that idol, it would contain that power. Now there's pluses and minuses to this. The plus side is you can take it now and use it to amplify your work. The negative side is that your idol no longer can use it because the power is not available to them. It's inside of here now. Unless you were to stipulate, I want my idol to utilize the power in here, right? But the point being is, in essence, it takes the power out of the room and it's in here now. So that's a key thing to understand. So the practical application is simply creating the container and having it around for what you're doing. Now, you do want to be relatively specific when you're working with things. You could be very, very vague when creating it. Like, let's say that I were to cast a spell on this stone to contain all worship that I do. So whenever it's near you, and whenever you do any kind of worship, with whatever idol, it'll be trapped in here. Now, you can be more specific. You can say, I want it to contain the power from the incense that I offer. Now it's only taking the incense offerings, and if you put food offerings or worship or praise or songs, those powers won't be trapped in it, and those would stay behind. So keep in mind that you can specify a little bit here on the actual setup when you're setting this thing up, what type of powers you want to acquire. And if you're unsure as to what you can't set it up for and what you can, generalizations are appropriate. And just set it up and make sure that it's in the room when you're doing it. Pronouncing things with your words are typically considered spells. It's a way to verbalize the goddess of magic. She pays attention and is able to work through that verbalization of words and turn those into something and use those to do things. And that's just how it works. This is why throughout history we have prayers, praise, spell casting, there's even curses. Throughout history of our existence as humans on earth, you probably won't find a place where words are not used in a spiritual manner. So it's a basic concept of how to set these things up. There's more advanced methods. There's more things you can add to it, take away. Like I said, with being specific rather than vague in your setup, there's the same thing with how you set it up. You could use an idol that already has power in it to help create a power stone, which would be normally not as powerful if you didn't have the idol. So, for instance, I have an idol in front of me of Thor, let's say. And I say, I ask that Thor intervene and help turn this stone into a container for the incense worship that I do. Now, in this scenario, those spells don't count as I'm saying them because this is not a stone, right? So you need to be specific. If I was going to label this, it would be a piece of technology. It looks like it's just a converter for USB to USB-C. So I would be specific at that point. But as I'm not being specific, I'm not saying the actual name of it, nothing's happening. And plus, Thor's idol's not here. So now, if he was, though, it would help make it stronger. And you can do a whole ritualistic ceremony, and the more powers you create during that ceremony that are flowing in that room can be then used for this. Now, my experience with things are that powers, when they're created without a container, lasts in a room for usually 2 to 3 days. And that's usually because if you have an idol there, that idol comes down and takes those powers and utilizes them to help your life. And that god or goddess is going to utilize them. So it's never 100% 2 to 3 days. I've just noticed on my average, it could be within minutes that Thor came down and decided to use the powers to bless me, and the powers are gone. Okay? It could be within weeks, months even, before he decides to actually come down, because he himself may want the powers to build in that room so that he himself has more powers to use. So also along with this concept goes with the fact that you could be limiting your God's influence in your life. So you want to be careful when to use them, when you don't. And this is why you want them to be in an object. You don't just want to set up a room and have the powers in the room like normal, your altar room, your whatever you want to call it, and expect the powers to always be there. This is why a lot of people have inconsistent results when it comes to spell casting, prayers, intercessions, because the powers are often used by your god or your idol, through your idol. And you can specify in your prayers to your idol and ask them, please don't use the powers in the room, I'm building them up. But in that scenario, it makes it easier for you, and it makes it clearer for the idol and the god that you're working with. It's all in here, and you can put away. And you can keep filling these, but there is a level where it tops out. It's like a glass. It only gets so full. However, gold glasses, in this scenario, imagine this is a regular glass, and it fills up about 1 cup. A gold glass can maybe fill 10 cups. So if this was made of gold, it would 10 cups worth of power. So again, the value aspect multiplies how much can be filled in the item. So now that's just an example. It's not literal, obviously. These aren't cups. Okay, so that gives you the idea of how basic powers are contained. And the utilization is very simple. Whenever you do anything you're doing, you just make sure to mention that you want the power in this to go towards what you're doing. If you're casting a spell to bless your neighbor, may the powers in this stone be used to continue the spell. If you want to, ask for in prayer, may the powers of this stone help my words go before the gods, and then you can do your prayer, right? It's kind of the idea. Think about it a little bit logically. These aren't specific ways, it's just I'm phrasing as I go. I don't always say it that way. Another one could be, may the powers within this stone be used to help me enchant an item. And then you go on with your enchanting ritual. And so on. You can be using the powers to increase a worship ceremony, etc. All sorts of different things. That is what they become. So that gets you caught up basic trapping. And it's also something that must be kept in mind with a real quick note here is you got to remember your spells, your words and stuff, they don't have to be a perfect formula. You can use previous formulas from other people written it, but the intention and what you meant to do when you said it is really what takes precedence here. How you spelled it was not perfect, but your spirit was producing that information, and your verbal voice just helped to convey it. And everything went and worked together to create this spell. All right. So there's that one. I'll probably continue on here and give you a little bit more information about other ways to trap and utilize trapping powers.